It's done. It's over. Let's all just go home and wait for the 2024 season to roll around. Are you mad? Alright, Max Verstappen and Red Bull seem to be running away with it at the front, but there are so many other incredible stories that have been set up by the first 3 races in this 2023 season. In fact, I think there are 5 drivers that you should definitely be watching as the season progresses, and I'm going to tell you exactly why you should be watching them. But first, a little bit of a call to action. How about you hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel, maybe the like button too? Thanks very much. Let's crack on. Fernando Alonso. I thought I'd kick off with one that's fairly obvious. The Spaniard has been absolutely box office since returning to Formula 1, and he always finds himself in the headlines anyway, but a sneaky move to Aston Martin that people weren't expecting was scintillating Fernando Alonso behaviour. Unfortunately for Fernando, he's made a little bit of a habit in his career of making the wrong move at the wrong time, and usually finds himself in a car where he couldn't truly show how good he is, but he seems to have finally nailed it. And I'm not talking about the Taylor Swift situation. Of course, he's always been consistent, but the longevity this man is showing is absolutely astounding, and therefore has to be watched and just awed at. The fact that he's kept himself at this level, whatever car you put him in, he always puts in solid performances, but if you put him in a good car, suddenly you have yourself something very, very special. This season, he has 3 podium finishes in 3 races and looks to be set for some of the best form of his career now that he's in green. Bahrain, he managed those tyres expertly, and then on top of that, Aston Martin's tyre wear seems to be on the level above the rest of that pack behind Red Bull. So towards the end of the race, we got to see some of those overtaking manoeuvres that were just millimetre precise from Fernando. Then in Saudi and Australia, we got to see the professionalism of him, holding onto a position, making that position look comfortable, which is a skill in itself, and a touch of luck holding onto the podium after a spin, but it was Sainz's fault that the spin happened anyway, and sometimes you just kind of have to make your own luck in Formula 1. He has shown everything that makes a driver entertaining to watch in 3 races, and undoubtedly there is more to come. However, if you need more convincing, you're greedy, but also the main reason that we need to be watching Fernando Alonso so closely this season is that he won't be around forever. Alonso, Kimi, Seb, Hamilton to an extent, all represent a phase in the sport, a generation that is slowly coming to an end. With Kimi and Seb already retiring in back-to-back years, this is the chance to see one of the greatest, many argue the greatest naturally talented driver that the sport has ever seen, in a car that's competitive, in a car that he can battle in a car where he could win. The scenes when he gets that 33rd win, finally, after a decade of waiting, is going to be indescribable. Yuki Tsunoda is most certainly a driver that you should be having an eye on during this season. It's his 3rd season in Formula 1, but his first season where he seems really settled into a car and into the team. The hype around him was absolutely mental when he entered the sport, and for good reason. Like, he was rushed through the system by Red Bull, and only spending a season in Formula 4, Formula 3, and Formula 2 before coming in as Pierre Gasly's teammate in 2021. When a prospect like that is brought through by Red Bull of all people, it's always going to catch the eye, but it's taken a little time for him to adapt. During that season when he was a rookie, next to Pierre Gasly, who at the time had become a clear number 1 in that AlphaTauri setup, he definitely struggled, but then coming into 2022, we also had the regulation changes, and the car was completely different. We actually saw both Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly struggle at this point, but over the course of the season, the gap between the two of them narrowed massively. Like, if you look at their qualifying and their race pace, Yuki Tsunoda definitely got closer to Pierre. So my argument is 2023 is the first season where he's going into a car and it hasn't dramatically changed from the year before. He's had a year to actually understand the fundamentals of this AlphaTauri package. It's a shame that the package that they do have right now is looking like it might be the slowest on the entire grid. However though, Yuki Tsunoda in the first 3 races been incredibly consistent and seems to be getting the most out of the car in front of him, like a P11 in Bahrain, a P11 in Saudi Arabia, and then a P10 in a crazy Australian Grand Prix. Plus, he's only one of 2 drivers to actually have made up places in every race this season. I'll let you guess the other in the comments. It's a combination of improving and I think not having Gasly there and wanting to take up the number 1 role in that team, because team boss Franz Tost said Yuki has made big steps forward, not only from the driving side, also from the technical side. For me, I just feel like Yuki Tsunoda is absolutely ready to blow up and become one of those drivers that gets linked to those seats higher up the grid. On top of that, in my opinion, it's kind of sink or swim time too. The storyline of Yuki replacing Perez or not starts rolling this season if he can show up and smash Nick De Vries. There's so much to be excited about. There's so much jeopardy around Yuki Tsunoda this year. Am I a bit biased because I'm supporting Yuki Tsunoda this season thanks to the Formula 1 quiz? Maybe, but I can't wait to see how the next 20 races unfold for Yuki Tsunoda. Nico Hülkenberg, the man who just will not leave the Formula One grid. He's just stuck around as a reserve driver, just waiting, like lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce like a German shepherd. I did a video on Nico specifically where I go into detail on how impressed by his season I've been so far, considering the kind of driver that I was expecting to see this year at Haas, which I'll link below if you're interested. But overall, I think we can agree he has been on fire this season. The whole Mick Schumacher, Gunther Steiner, Toto Wolff drama, that will be a thing that continues to develop as the season progresses. But when it comes to Nico taking that seat, many were pretty uninspired, but he's already shown that it's looking like one of the better decisions that Haas has made in recent years, and there haven't been many of those. Nico, though, just feels like a driver with a brand new hunger inside of him. Like, he's always had a steady head inside that helmet. That's why he's been a great backup driver for 3 seasons, because you can trust him to go into a car and do a job for you. But now he has a full-time seat again. He's realized, I think, that he has a chance to cement his place on the Formula One grid. He has to be one to keep an eye on, right? Especially as that battle between him and Kevin Magnussen develops. We have to remember that Kevin is synonymous with the Haas team now, right? He's had some incredible highs with the American team, but I feel like Nico could come in and steal a little bit of the spotlight from the Dane. Plus, if you want another story to hope for, it has to be that podium, right? That ever elusive podium that almost came to fruition, by the way, in Australia, running P4 before the reset. I was watching Brazil 2012 as well recently, where he was leading in that Force India car, an absolute madness of a race and well worth a rewatch. But another race like that, a little bit of chaos, plus him at Haas, Hülkenberg and Gunther Steiner celebrating on the podium together. My goodness me, let me dream. Zhou Guanyu, I think this might just be a me thing, but let me explain quickly. Zhou came into the grid last year, the only rookie, and there was no real hype around him. Many just played it off as alpha, getting him in for the money, and I think a few people thought he was going to show Latifi or even Mazepin levels of driving, but I liked him, and after the first few races, he'd already shown to me he was at least going to be a level above that, and he got so unlucky with reliability. It just felt like every time he was making moves and starting to build up a little bit of momentum in the car, it would explode.
And how's your broken everything?
So now this season, I really want to see what he can do if he's able to get a streak of 3 or 4 solid performances together. He's already outqualified his teammate in Bottas in 2 of the 3 races, and I think he was only 0.03 of a second adrift of the Finn in Bahrain. And he's got himself his first couple of points as well this season in Australia, keeping himself out of the chaos that was happening in front of him. But it's not just the performances so far that have me intrigued. When there is so much change behind the scenes at Alfa Romeo still to come, it feels like this is going to be a career-defining season for both Zhou and Bottas, with the team swapping over to Sauber and then eventually Audi. There's already so much hype around this project and speculation over which drivers will be in the team by the time 2026 rolls around. I think that Sauber will probably want to get in Théo Pourchaire, their reserve driver this year, into a full-time seat sooner rather than later, and then there's no telling if Audi will already have a say in driver recruitment as well. Like, I mean, they already have started their engine testing and preparing the power unit, and there's still almost 3 seasons to go. Zhou is in a tough position where he could perform really, really well and still feasibly lose his seat for 2024, although I feel like if he can outperform his much more experienced teammate in Bottas over the course of a season, he gives himself at least a little bit of a buffer. As much as Bottas is a race winner and obviously an incredible driver, if Zhou is giving more to the team than Bottas is at the time, I could see Bottas losing his seat. That's why I'm so interested to see how much Zhou can improve over the course of his second season in Formula One, to see if Sauber give him that shot next year, or if this is the end of the road for Zhou Guanyu in his Formula One career. Last but most certainly not least is George Russell. Not everyone's favourite driver, and I can completely understand that after a couple of little collisions last year that he always seemed to come out the better of, but he did also outscore Lewis Hamilton last year too. I'll save you the comment. I'm aware that on average, Lewis Hamilton did have the better race pace, and I still think that Lewis Hamilton is the better driver overall. The thing with George Russell for me though, and the reason that I've put him on this list of drivers that I think we need to watch really carefully this season, if he can close that gap to Lewis Hamilton in terms of average race pace, or if he can finish above him in the standings again, when do we start to give him credit that maybe he's just edging out Lewis Hamilton from this Mercedes setup? I know it's really tricky to judge because I feel like Lewis Hamilton does have another gear to find if he really needed to. Like, if Mercedes do find a way to be competitive and at the front, I would still say that Lewis Hamilton would be the driver to level up and win those races for Mercedes. The question for me is, when does that change? If George absolutely smashes this season, like, he's already 3-0 up in qualifying this year, he was already leading the Australian Grand Prix before the red flag ruined it for him and the team. I just feel like the dynamic at Mercedes and the growth of George Russell as the eventual Hamilton replacement will be very interesting to watch this season, and that's why I'm going to be watching George Russell very closely. I've got a few questions to answer. I want to know, is he World Championship caliber? Can he compete with Verstappen, with Leclerc, with Alonso from those other big teams? I know George has been in F1 for 5 seasons now, but the 3 at Williams, because they were so far adrift from the rest of the field and he spent the majority of that smashing Nicholas Latifi race after race, I do want to see what George Russell can do in those really tight kind of 3 or 4 way battles for podiums or even wins, just to see what his mental is like through those scenarios, and if under that kind of pressure he still has that millimeter precision that you need for those kind of battles, because it's so different to what we've seen from him before. Like, even last year, Mercedes kind of found themselves 3rd in the championship all on their own, so they didn't have too many battles, whereas this year it's them, Ferrari, Aston, all in for 2nd place in the Constructors. I could see it getting very, very tasty. And after all of that, if you're not convinced that this 2023 season is still incredibly exciting, I don't know what more to offer you.
I've got nothing left.
5 drivers at all ends of the grid that will undoubtedly have some box office storylines during this season. I cannot wait to see how this unfolds. If you think I've missed somebody obvious, please let me know in the comments down below. And whilst you're down there, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you next time.